The boy's scream cut through the playground just as his body hit the ground. No one moved. A 5-year-old girl stood over him, small, barefoot, dressed in faded clothes that didn't belong in a place like this. Olamide's chest rose and fell steadily. Her tiny fists still clenched, her eyes calm. Too calm. Around her expensive shoes froze mid-step. Mothers gasped. Security guards hesitated. Because the rich boy who had tried to grab her wooden bracelet, Gidi, the untouchable son of a powerful family, was now curled on the ground, shaking in fear. And the rural nobody they had been laughing at just seconds ago had taken him down in 3 precise moves. Then a luxury car door opened, and the most powerful man in the city stepped out, his gaze locking onto that bracelet. Before we go on, tell me honestly, if you saw a child being humiliated in public, would you step in or stay silent? And where are you watching from today? Drop your country and local time in the comments. If you love powerful emotional stories with shocking twists and satisfying justice, don't forget to subscribe and stay with me. Before Lagos heard the name Olamide, before wealthy mothers whispered about the little village girl who had humiliated a rich boy in broad daylight, there was only a dusty road, a rusted bus, and a woman who had long ago learned how to carry pain without making a sound. Abini arrived in the city before dawn with 1 faded suitcase. 1 sleeping child across her lap, and less money than most people in Lagos spent on lunch. The bus station was loud, dirty, and impatient. Men shouted prices. Hawkers pushed bread oranges and cheap plastic toys into the faces of exhausted travelers. Engines coughed smoke into the air. Somewhere nearby, a baby cried. Somewhere else, 2 conductors were already fighting. Abini stepped down with Olamide still half asleep on her shoulder. Her sandals were worn thin. Her wrapper had been washed so many times its color had almost given up. Yet she stood straight. There was something in the way she held herself that suggested she had once expected more from life. Not luxury, not wealth, just fairness. Olamide blinked awake, rubbed one eye, and looked around. "Is this Lagos?" she asked. Abeni forced a smile. "Yes, it is noisy. It is always noisy." Olamide thought about that for a moment, then leaned closer and whispered, "Do rich people sleep?" That almost made Abeni laugh. "Almost. Maybe not," she said. "Maybe that is why they are always angry." Olamide grinned, and for a second the weight in Abeni's chest eased. That was how they began again. They rented a narrow room at the back of a crumbling building owned by a widow who liked cash and disliked questions. The room had 1 small window, a mattress on the floor, a bucket, a broken shelf, and a door that only locked if it was kicked shut twice. But it was better than sleeping at the station. Better than moving from village to village the way they had in the early years. Better than being found. Abini cleaned offices in the morning, washed clothes in the afternoon, and sometimes sold akara outside a bus stop in the evening, if her hands still had strength. She learned the city quickly, which streets were safe, which landlords lied, which employers delayed payment, which smiles carried contempt inside them. Lagos taught lessons the hard way. Olamide learned, too. She learned how to sit quietly in corners while her mother scrubbed floors. She learned how to tell when a shopkeeper was kind, and when kindness was only the first mask before cruelty. She learned that poor children were expected to be grateful for things rich children would never even notice. But what she learned most of all came long before Lagos. Back in the village under the shade of an old mango tree beside a cracked mud wall, Baba Femi had taught her how to stand. He had been a strange old man to outsiders. Lean, grey-bearded, always walking with a carved stick. Some said he had once been a soldier. Others said he had been a bodyguard to a chief. Children said he could hear lies the way other people heard drums. Nobody knew the full truth, and Baba Femi never explained himself. He simply watched. And one day, after seeing Olamide shoved into the dirt by boys older than her, he called her over. Again, he said. She had stared at him. Again, what? Again, let them push you. She frowned. Why? So you can decide whether falling is all you know. That was how it started. At first, Abeni refused. She did not want her daughter fighting. She did not want her noticed. She did not want anything about Olamide to be unusual. Teach her to read more, Abeni had said. Teach her prayers. Teach her patience. Babafemi had nodded, as if she were right, then replied, I am teaching her all three. What he taught Olamide was not violence. It was control, how to balance on unsteady ground, how to watch hands before mouths, how to move away before danger became pain, how to strike only when escape was gone, how to protect the head, the ribs, the throat, how to use speed when strength was impossible. Most of all, he taught her that fear was loud, but courage could be quiet. Your size is a lie people will believe, he told her once. Let them. The child listened the way some children listen to stories around a fire, completely, with her whole spirit. Abeni watched from a distance, torn between gratitude and dread, because every skill that could protect Olamide could also expose her. There were reasons Abeni lived carefully, reasons she never used her full name in the city, reasons she avoided newspapers, cameras, wealthy charity events, and any place where powerful men might look too closely. Reasons she kept one old wooden bracelet wrapped in cloth until the day Olamide grew curious enough to beg for it. Mama, whose is this? It was mine. It is beautiful. It is old. I still want it. Abeni should have said no. Instead, she stared at the bracelet too long. It was simple, hand-carved, not made by a jeweler or bought in a fancy store, but every line in it held memory. A pair of young hands had shaped it years ago with the foolish devotion of a man who thought love alone could protect the future. That man had been Tunde Adebayo. Back then, he was not the famous CEO whose face appeared on billboards and business magazines. He was just Tunde. Ambitious, yes. Brilliant, yes. But still hungry, still unfinished. Still capable of looking at Abeni as though the whole world became quieter when she spoke. He had loved her with the kind of certainty that made promises sound sacred, and Abeni, against every instinct she had developed from growing up poor, had believed him. She believed him when he said he would come back for her after his apprenticeship in the city. She believed him when he said success would change his life, but never his heart. She believed him when he carved that bracelet and slid it into her palm with a shy smile, saying, so that even if we are apart for a little while, something made by me stays with you. At the time she had laughed. At the time she had still believed separation could be temporary. Then came the silence. Letters stopped arriving. Calls never came. A woman she had never met appeared one afternoon with polished shoes, a cold smile, and words sharp enough to cut through bone. She told Abeni that Tunde had moved on, that men like him did not marry girls from villages, that powerful families had plans for him now, that if Abeni had dignity she would disappear quietly and stop dreaming above her station. Abeni had wanted to slam the door in her face. Then the woman revealed something else. She knew Abeni was pregnant, and suddenly the threat no longer sounded like arrogance. It sounded like power. Abeni never forgot the look in that woman's eyes. Calm, clean, certain. The look of someone used to deciding which lives mattered and which did not. Disappear, the woman had said, or your child will be born into danger. That was the day fear entered Abeni's bones and never fully left. She told no one the whole truth, not even Babafemi at first. She only left, changed places, worked, hid, endured. And when Olamide was born tiny and furious and impossibly alive, Abeni made one vow over her sleeping face. No one will use you the way they used me. That vow shaped everything. It was why Abeni kept Olamide close, why she discouraged questions about fathers, why she always said, "Some absences are not worth chasing," why she taught her daughter to be polite, but wary, gentle, but not helpless, why she accepted exhaustion as a fair price for safety. Yet children grow, cities intrude, fate circles back. By the time Olamide turned 5, questions had started coming harder. Why don't I have a father in our room? Because not every child does. Is mine dead? Abeni had gone still. No. Then where is he? There were some questions a mother could answer with lies. This was not one of them. So Abeni said softly, "Far away." Olamide had accepted that more easily than Abeni deserved. But the child was observant. She noticed how her mother's face changed whenever a certain kind of car passed too slowly. She noticed that Abeni became tense around men in expensive suits. She noticed the bracelet always disappeared when strangers came close. Then one morning before school, Olamide found the bracelet again and tied it around her small wrist before Abeni could stop her. "Mama, please. It makes me feel brave." Abeni opened her mouth to object. Then she looked at her daughter's face. The stubborn chin, the clear, searching eyes, the odd mixture of innocence and steadiness that reminded her so painfully of another person that she had to turn away. Only for today, she whispered. She did not know that today would open a door the past had spent 5 years trying to keep shut. She did not know that at a glittering school playground in Lagos, cruelty would collide with destiny in the body of her little girl. She did not know that Tunde Adebayo would see that bracelet, or that the life she had built out of silence, labor, and secrecy was already beginning to crack. Because sometimes the truth does not return like thunder. Sometimes it returns as a child in faded clothes, standing in the center of a rich man's world, refusing to fall. By the time the security guards finally remembered they were supposed to act, the entire playground had already chosen its version of the story. Some said the rural girl was wild. Some said she had been trained like a street fighter. Some said children from places like that were dangerous. No one said what had really happened first. No one said Jide had laughed in Olamide's face, called her a bush child, and reached for the wooden bracelet after his mother mocked the smell of dust on her clothes. No one said Olamide had warned him twice. "Do not touch me. Do not touch my mother." Those details disappeared quickly, buried under outrage that a poor child had dared to defend herself against the son of a powerful family. Jide's mother was the loudest. Her name was Mrs. Balogan, and she had the polished fury of a woman unused to hearing the word no from anyone with less money than she had. She pushed through the cluster of shocked nannies and parents bent over her son, then straightened with eyes full of venom. "Who brought this child in here?" she snapped. "Who allowed this filthy little savage near my son Abeni's body?" Stiffened. Olamide stepped closer to her mother without fear. Her little face was still calm, but her hand had curled around the side of Abeni's wrapper as if anchoring herself there. "He grabbed my bracelet," she said. Mrs. Balogan laughed in disbelief. "You struck him because of that." Olamide blinked. "No, I struck him because he did not stop." There was a sharp intake of breath from somewhere behind them. A few of the other mothers exchanged looks. 1 or 2 seemed almost impressed. But admiration never survives long in a crowd that smells class difference. Fear turned quickly into contempt again. A school administrator hurried onto the playground, sweating already. He was a small man in a neat grey suit, the kind who had built his career by pleasing rich parents before protecting children. "What is happening here?" he asked, though the panic in his eyes made it clear he had heard enough to guess. Mrs. Balogan turned on him instantly. "What is happening is that your school has allowed village trash to attack my son." Abeni drew in one controlled breath. "Please speak about my child with respect," she said. The administrator barely looked at her. "Madam, perhaps you and your daughter should come with me." "Why?" Olamide asked. The man frowned, annoyed that the question had come from such a small person. "Because you have caused serious trouble." Jada, who had been theatrically whimpering on the ground, suddenly sat up enough to point a trembling finger at Olamide. His face was red, not with pain but humiliation. "She is mad," he shouted. "She jumped on me like an animal." Olamide's eyes narrowed. "That is not true." Mrs. Balogan clutched her chest. "Now she calls my son a liar." Abini placed one protective hand on Olamide's shoulder. "My daughter is telling the truth." That only made the woman angrier. "How much were you paid to get your child into this school?" Mrs. Balogan hissed. "Women like you are always looking for a door into other people's lives." The insult landed harder than the others because it was aimed so precisely. Abeni felt it in her throat, in the old wound that never quite healed. She had heard versions of those words before. Gold diggers, opportunists, village girls who did not know their place, women who reached above themselves and then cried when they fell. Before she could answer, a hush rippled through the front gate. It moved like wind through dry leaves, subtle, then immediate, then everywhere at once. Heads turned. A dark luxury car had stopped just outside the school courtyard. Not flashy, not loud. The kind of expensive that did not need to shout. A driver stepped out first, then another man from the front passenger seat, and then, finally from the rear door, Tunde Adebayo. He stepped onto the pavement in a sharply cut navy suit that seemed almost too controlled for the heat of Lagos. He was taller than most men in the yard, broad-shouldered, self-contained, the kind of man who changed the air around him simply by entering it. Conversations died without being told to die. Postures straightened, smiles rearranged themselves into deference. Even the administrator's face changed at once. "Mr. Adebayo," he said, rushing forward with a nervous half-bow. "We did not expect." Tunde did not answer. He was looking past everyone else. Straight at Olamide. No at the bracelet on her wrist. For one suspended second, his face gave away nothing. Then something inside it shifted. Not visibly enough for strangers to read, but enough that Abeni felt the blood leave her own face. She knew that look. That. Not because she had seen it often. Because she had seen it once, years ago, when a younger Tunde had looked at her as if he had just realized the future could become real. Recognition. Impossible, unwelcome recognition. Abeni's fingers tightened on Olamide's shoulder. No, she thought at once. No, not here. Tunde took one step forward, then another. Mrs. Balogan turned toward him, her outrage rearranging itself into wounded elegance. "Mr. Adebayo, thank God you are here. This child assaulted my son in front of everyone." Still he did not look at her. His gaze lifted slowly from the bracelet to Olamide's face. Children often resemble their parents in fragments too small to explain a curve of the mouth, a pause before speaking, the stillness in the eyes. Most people only notice resemblance once they are told to search for it. But blood sometimes recognizes itself before logic arrives. Olamide stood very still, studying him with frank curiosity. She had never seen a man dressed so beautifully look so unsettled. He crouched to her level. It was such an unexpected act that the entire courtyard seemed to inhale. "What is your name?" he asked. His voice was low and even, but there was strain under it, tightly hidden. Olamide answered without hesitation. "Olamide." "Who gave you that bracelet?" The child glanced at Abeni before replying. "My mother." Tunde's jaw tightened. Only then did he lift his eyes to Abeni. And the world, as far as she was concerned, stopped. He knew her. The shock on his face was not confusion. It was impact. Deep and immediate and almost physically painful. Beneath the discipline of the CEO, beneath the years, the money, the polished distance, there he was, Tunde, the man she had once loved enough to build a life around in her mind. "Abeni," he said. Her name did not sound like a question. It sounded like something rescued from drowning. A murmur spread through the watching crowd. Mrs. Belogan's expression flickered in sudden uncertainty. The administrator looked from one face to the other, as if realizing too late that the situation had entered territory far above his salary. Abini forced herself to stand straighter. "Good afternoon, sir," she said. "Sir?" The word cut him. She saw it happen. His voice dropped. "What are you doing here?" There were 100 answers to that. Surviving, working, hiding, raising the daughter you were never allowed to know. But under all those truths was another one, simple and bitter. Living. Instead, she said, "I came for my child." Olamide frowned and looked between them. "Mama, you know him?" Abini's stomach twisted. "Not anymore," she said quietly. That landed hard, too. Tunda rose slowly to his full height. The discipline returned to his face, but not completely. Something raw still moved behind his eyes. Mrs. Belogan sensed the shift and rushed to reclaim the center of the scene. "Mr. Adebayo, whatever connection there may be here, this girl attacked my son. We cannot ignore that." This time Tunda looked at her. It was brief, cold, devastating. "What happened?" he asked. Mrs. Belogan pointed dramatically. "My son was standing peacefully when that child struck him." "That is a lie," Olamide said. Several adults gasped at her boldness, but Tunde's attention snapped back to her, not with anger, with interest. "You called him a liar?" Miss Belogan spat. "How dare you?" Olamide lifted her chin. "Because he is one." Abini should have silenced her. She knew that. But some part of her, the wounded part that had been swallowing humiliation for too many years, felt a fierce pulse of pride instead. Tunda's gaze moved to Jid. "What did you do before she touched you?" he asked. The boy opened his mouth, hesitated, and looked at his mother. "Wrong move." Tunda noticed. The CEO turned toward the nearest guard. Was there camera coverage on this side of the yard? The administrator jumped in. "Yes, sir. Of course. Then bring it. At once." That changed everything. Mrs. Belogan's confidence flickered. "Is that really necessary?" "They are children." "If they are children," Tunda said calmly, "then the truth should be simple." The woman went silent. Abini felt danger moving under the surface now, not just humiliation. If Tunda saw the footage, he would know Olamide had defended herself. But that was not the danger. The danger was the way he kept looking at the bracelet, the way his gaze returned to Olamide's face as if he could not help it, the way the years between them had collapsed too quickly. He took one step closer to Abini, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "You disappeared." Her throat tightened. "You let me." Something flashed across his face, pain, then anger, then restraint. "I did not," he said. She almost laughed at the absurd cruelty of those words. Almost. Instead she replied, "This is not the place." "No," he said. "It is not." For a brief second, silence stretched between them, full of everything the crowd could not understand. Then Olamide did something neither of them expected. She stepped slightly in front of Abini. The movement was small but unmistakable. Protective. Tunda saw it. He froze. Children shield those they fear losing. That instinct does not come from nowhere. Olamide looked up at him with steady, dark eyes. "Why are you making my mother sad?" The question was so pure, so direct, that it cut deeper than accusation. The murmuring around them died completely. Tunda stared at her. Then, for the first time since stepping out of the car, his control cracked. Only a little, but enough for Abini to see the truth. Whatever he had become, in the years since she had last known him, wealthy, powerful, unreachable, he had not expected this. He had not expected her. He had not expected a child with her eyes and his stillness to stand in front of him guarding the woman he had once failed. The administrator came hurrying back with a tablet in trembling hands. "Sir," he said the footage. Tunde did not take it immediately. His eyes remained on Olamide. And when he finally spoke, his voice was softer than before, almost unwillingly so. "No one will insult this child again while I am standing here." The sentence fell into the courtyard like a match into dry grass, because everyone heard what he had not said. Not just authority, not just fairness, possession, connection, something personal. And in that instant, as Mrs. Balogan's face drained, as Abeni's pulse hammered, as Olamide frowned in puzzled silence, one truth became impossible to ignore. This was no longer a schoolyard incident. This was the past stepping into the sunlight. The footage cleared Olamide in less than 30 seconds. Jide had shoved first. He had mocked first. He had reached for the bracelet after Olamide warned him twice, and when he lunged again, the little girl had moved with startling precision, one turn, one sharp shift of balance, one fast sweep that sent him stumbling to the ground in front of everyone. There was no savagery in it, only control, the kind of control that frightened people more than chaos ever could. Mrs. Balogan tried to recover. She laughed too loudly, touched her pearls, and declared that children exaggerated things physically all the time. But the courtyard had already changed sides. Not fully, not honestly, not out of moral courage. Crowds rarely become decent that quickly, yet they loved a shift in power, and now power had turned, especially because Tunde Adebayo was still standing there. He watched the footage once, then again, then handed the tablet back without expression. "So he said his voice, calm enough to terrify your son, attacked a child, attempted to take her property, and lied." Jide's mother opened her mouth. "Mr. Adebayo, surely we do not need to make—" "We do!" The two words landed like iron. The school administrator nearly bent in half, trying to agree with him. "Yes, sir. Absolutely, sir." Tunde turned to the man. "What is your school's policy when a child is harassed because of class background?" The administrator blinked. "Sir." Tunde's stare hardened. "Do you have one?" Silence. That silence told its own story. Abeni stood very still, one hand resting on Olamide's shoulder. She should have felt relieved. Her daughter had been publicly proven innocent. The rich boy's lie had collapsed. The crowd that had stared at them with contempt only minutes earlier now looked embarrassed, curious, cautious. But relief would not come, because Tunde had not stopped looking, even while he questioned the staff, even while Mrs. Balogan began shrinking under the weight of her own exposure. Part of his attention remained fixed on Olamide's wrist, on the small carved wooden bracelet, on the impossible child wearing it. It was too much, too dangerous. Abeni knew that danger did not always arrive as a raised hand or a spoken threat. Sometimes it arrived as recognition, as old truth pulling breath back into itself. Mama Olamide whispered, tugging lightly at her wrapper. "Can we go now?" Abeni looked down at her daughter and saw something rare in those brave little eyes. Not fear, confusion. Children understand cruelty sooner than adults think, but they are always startled by adult silence after cruelty has been exposed. It unsettles them. It teaches them something terrible about the world. "Yes," Abeni said softly. "We are leaving." Tunde turned at once. Abeni. She hated how her name still changed when he said it, hated that the years had not erased the sound from her body. "This is not finished," he said. Her mouth tightened. "For me, it was finished years ago." A flicker of pain crossed his face, but she did not let herself soften. Not here. Not in front of all these eyes hungry for drama. Tunde glanced at Olamide again. "I need to speak with you. You do not need anything from me." "I think I do." His control remained impressive, but now she could hear the pressure beneath it. That disturbed her more than anger would have. Anger she knew how to resist, but restraint from a man like Tunda meant calculation, and calculation meant persistence. A voice cut in before either of them could say more. "Darling?" Every head turned. A sleek black car had just rolled to a stop behind Tunda's, and from it stepped a woman who seemed designed to be admired before she was even heard. Tall, elegant, perfectly composed. Her cream dress fit like privilege itself had stitched it to her skin. Gold flashed at her ears and wrists. Her smile arrived first, polished and bright enough for public spaces. Temilade. She walked toward them with the confidence of a woman who expected doors to open before she reached them. At first her expression was light affectionate even. Then she saw where Tunde was looking. She saw Abeni. She saw Olamide. And something cold moved behind the smile. "Tunda," she said, her tone warm for the audience and sharp for him alone. "I thought your meeting ended an hour ago." It did. She slipped beside him close enough to claim familiarity. Her gaze swept over Abeni's worn clothes, then the little girl, then the bracelet. Nothing in her face visibly changed, but Abeni felt the assessment like a blade. The administrator rushed forward again now, nearly tripping over his own usefulness. "Miss Temilade, there was a small incident with one of the children, but Mr. Adebayo has already." "I can see that," she said smoothly. Mrs. Balogan, sensing an ally, rushed to explain in the fast, wounded voice of a woman trying to recover social ground. "This child attacked my son," she said, pointing at Olamide, "and now everyone is behaving as though we are the villains." Temilade turned to Olamide and smiled the kind of smile adults often use when they want to appear kind to children they have already judged. "Did you hurt him?" "Sweetheart." Olamide met her gaze without blinking. "He tried to take my bracelet." Temilade's eyes flicked down to the bracelet for barely a second. But Tunde saw it. Abeni saw him see it. And suddenly, the air between the adults became more dangerous than anything that had happened between the children. "The footage is clear," Tunde said flatly. Olamide defended herself. Temilade lifted her brows. "Olamide," she repeated the name as if tasting it. Then she turned toward Abeni. "And you are?" Abeni already knew what this was. Not a real question. A sorting ritual. A demand to locate someone socially before deciding how much humanity to give them. "Abeni," she said. Something small and unreadable flashed through Temilade's eyes. "Have we met before?" "No." The lie came instantly, and Abeni knew it had been wise. If Temilade knew the past, if she recognized the name, or connected anything too quickly, this moment would travel upward into forces Abeni had spent years avoiding. Tunda said nothing but tension gathered in his jaw. Temilade smiled again. "I see." She did not see. Not yet. But she had sensed enough to become interested. That was bad enough. Olamide stepped closer to Abeni's leg. Temilade looked down at her. "You are very brave," she said. Olamide shrugged. "I just did not want him touching me." The adults around them shifted awkwardly. There was no elegant response to such plain truth. Temilade laughed lightly, though no real amusement lived in it. "Children from the city are rough sometimes. Children from the city are rude sometimes," Olamide replied. Mrs. Balogan gasped. The administrator closed his eyes briefly, as if praying to survive the morning. To Abeni's alarm, Tunde almost smiled. Only for half a second. Only in the corner of his mouth. But it was there. Temilade noticed that too, and that changed her. Not outwardly. Outwardly she remained graceful, amused, socially flawless. Yet from that moment, every glance she sent Abeni became sharper. Measuring, comparing, hunting for context. "Perhaps," she said, slipping her hand lightly onto Tunde's arm, "this has all been emotional for the children. We should not turn a playground misunderstanding into something larger. A misunderstanding, Tunde repeated. The softness left his voice entirely. The woman beside him held his gaze, smile still in place. That is not what I meant, but it was. Abini had seen women like Temilade before, though not so perfectly dressed. Women who knew how to flatten truth without sounding cruel. Women who preserved injustice by calling it inconvenience. Tunde removed his arm from her touch with measured politeness. No one insulted this child by mistake, he said, and no one threatened her by mistake. Temilade's eyes cooled. There it was again, that sense of two conversations taking place at once. One visible, one hidden. Abini could feel the danger building and wanted no part of it. We are leaving, she said. This time Tunde did not try to stop her immediately. He only asked, "Where are you staying?" Her gaze sharpened. "Why? Because I intend to speak with you. There is nothing left to say. That is where you are wrong." The words struck more deeply than they should have, because some buried piece of her still feared he might be telling the truth. She bent, took Olamide's hand, and turned away. Mama Olamide whispered as they began walking, "Who is he?" Abeni's heart beat hard against her ribs. "A man from a long time ago. Did he make you cry too?" The question was quiet, innocent, deadly. Abeni did not answer immediately. Behind her she could feel Tunde watching them go, could feel Temilade watching him watch them. At the gate just before stepping out, Olamide looked back. Children do this instinctively when something unfinished pulls at a room. She stared at Tunde for one long second, her dark eyes narrowed in that thoughtful way she had when trying to solve a puzzle adults thought hidden. Then she lifted her small hand and touched the bracelet. Not waving, not showing it off, just touching it as if checking that it was still there. Tunde went completely still. Abeni saw it. And so did Temilade. This time the change in Temilade's face was almost invisible, but not invisible enough. Recognition. No, not yet, but alarm. The moment passed. Abeni turned and led Olamide out through the school gate into the burning Lagos afternoon. The city noise swallowed them fast horns. Bus conductors shouting engines, vendors heat. Ordinary life rushed in as if nothing had happened. Yet Abeni's pulse would not slow, because she knew the look in Tunde's eyes. Because she knew men like him did not let impossible things go. Because she had seen something else too, something perhaps even more dangerous, the instant Temilade understood that whatever had just happened was not random. By the time mother and daughter boarded a crowded danfo back toward the poorer side of the city, the playground incident was already growing beyond itself. At the school, whispers were spreading. In Tunde's car, silence had hardened into thought. At Temilade's side, suspicion had begun to bloom. And far beneath all of it, under old betrayal and newer power, the buried truth had shifted. Not fully unearthed. Not yet. But awake. That evening, long before the sun had finished sinking, Tunde Adebayo would order a quiet investigation into one wooden bracelet. One missing woman and one little girl whose eyes had unsettled him more than any boardroom battle ever had. And somewhere else in the city, without yet understanding why another woman would feel the first tremor of a past she believed had been sealed forever. By evening, the school incident had already begun changing shape in other people's mouths. In the homes of wealthy parents, it became a cautionary tale about discipline and background. In chauffeured cars, it became gossip. In private calls between women who collected secrets, the way others collected jewelry, it became something more interesting. The story of a powerful CEO who had stopped in the middle of his day and publicly defended a poor village child. That was the part no one could leave alone. Not the fight, not the bracelet, not even the little girl's unnerving calm. It was Tunde Adebayo. Why had he cared? Why had he looked at that child as if the world had shifted under his feet? and why several witnesses insisted. Had he spoken to the mother like a man speaking to someone he had once known too well? By the time night settled over Lagos, those questions had already found their way to Temilade. She sat in the private lounge of a rooftop restaurant, one long leg crossed over the other, a glass of sparkling water untouched in front of her. The city glittered below like something beautiful and expensive that had forgotten how many people suffered beneath it. Her phone screen glowed in her hand. She had replayed the videos sent to her from the school 3 times already. Not because of the child, because of Tunde's face. He was usually a careful man. Even in anger he was measured. Even in surprise he controlled the edges of himself. Yet in that short clip, when the camera shook and zoomed clumsily toward the little girl, Temilade had seen something she did not like. Disruption. The child mattered, and that meant the mother mattered too. Her jaw tightened. Across from her sat Madame Ronke, elegant in deep green silk, the kind of woman whose beauty had matured into something colder and more strategic. She listened without interrupting as her daughter described the scene. When Temilade finished, Madame Ronke only tapped one polished finger against the table. "What is the woman's name?" she asked. "Abeni." The older woman's expression did not change at once, but something in her eyes sharpened. "Are you sure?" Yes. Now the silence that followed was no longer casual. Temilade leaned forward. "You know that name?" Madame Ronke lifted her glass and took a slow sip before answering. "I know many names. Mother." That one word held years of trained irritation. Temilade had grown up in rooms where truth was rarely spoken first, but she also knew when a lie was being prepared. Madame Ronke set the glass down. Years ago, she said, there was a village girl who became inconvenient. Temilade did not move. Inconvenient how? In the way poor girls often become when they attract the attention of men who are building futures too important to be interrupted. Temilade's stomach turned not with sympathy but with understanding. "Tunde." Madame Ronke gave the smallest nod. Something hot flashed through Temilade's chest. Rage, yes, but beneath it insult. She had invested years in patience, years in smiling through Tunde's distance, positioning herself perfectly, learning his rhythms, earning the approval of board members and social circles alike. She had accepted that his heart was not easy territory. That love, if it came, would come slowly. That power first required proximity, and proximity required discipline. And now a woman from his past had appeared out of nowhere with a child, and a look on Tunde's face Temilade had never once received from him. "What did you do?" she asked quietly. Madame Ronke held her gaze. What was necessary? Temilade looked back at the phone screen. She paused the video on the moment Olamide turned and touched the bracelet. "That child," she said, "is connected to him." Madame Ronke's voice stayed cool. "You do not know that." "No. But I know men, and I know the look of recognition when I see it." The older woman did not answer. That told Temilade everything she needed. Meanwhile, on the poorer side of the city, Abeni was trying to convince herself that silence still had power. Their room was dim except for one weak bulb and the warm spill of streetlight through the cracked curtain. Olamide sat cross-legged on the mattress eating beans and bread from a metal plate and narrating the school fight as if it had happened to someone else entirely. "I told him not to touch me," she said, chewing. "Then he touched me anyway, so I made him sit down." Abeni nearly laughed despite herself. "You made him fall down," she corrected. Olamide shrugged. "That is another kind of sitting." That did make Abeni laugh, but only for a second. Then the image returned Tunde crouching in front of the child, staring at the bracelet, saying her name, as if something lost had just risen from the dead. Abeni's smile faded. Mama Olamide said softly, "Was that man bad to you?" Abini looked up. Children always asked the question at the wrong moment, or perhaps the right one. "No," she said slowly. "Not exactly." "Then why did your face look like that?" "Because memory can wound and call you home in the same breath," she thought. "Because love that was interrupted by betrayal never fully dies. It hardens, splinters, waits. Because if Tunde began asking questions now, the life she had built for Olamide could break open. Instead she said, because some people belong to a painful time." Olamide absorbed that in silence. Then she nodded as if filing it away beside all the other difficult things adults did not explain fully. A knock came at the door. Abini's whole body went still. At this hour, knocks rarely brought anything good. She moved quietly, signaling Olamide with a look. The child slipped off the mattress at once and stood behind the shelf near the wall, exactly where Baba Femi had taught her to move when danger announced itself. Abini opened the door only a little. It was her landlady, Mama Sade, breathless and excited. "There are men outside asking for you," she whispered. Abini's pulse spiked. What men, not police? Rich men. That was somehow worse. Abini stepped into the narrow corridor and looked through the open front of the building. Two men in dark suits stood beside a black car. They were not aggressive, not loud. One of them held himself with the controlled stillness of private security. The other younger had the polished professionalism of someone who worked close to money. Not Tunde himself, but close enough. "I told them nothing," Mama Sade said quickly. "But they know your daughter's name." Abini shut her eyes for one brief second. Too fast. Everything was moving too fast. She returned inside and grabbed Olamide's small shoulder bag. "We are leaving." Olamide blinked. "Again, yes." "Because of the man from the school?" Abini did not answer. She wrapped a scarf around her hair, took the little cash hidden in a cup near the mattress, and tied Olamide's shoes herself with fingers that trembled only once. But before they reached the back door, another voice came from the corridor. "Miss Abini." It was the younger man. Calm. Respectful. Wrong place, wrong time. Abini froze. "We are not here to harm you," he continued. "My name is Kunle. I work for Mr. Tunde Adebayo." Olamide looked up instantly. Abini's jaw hardened. "I have nothing to say to your employer. That may be true, but he has asked me to deliver an invitation." She said nothing. Kunle slid an envelope gently along the floor into the room, not crossing the threshold. Clever, non-threatening, calculated. "Tomorrow evening," he said. "A charity gala hosted by the foundation. Mr. Adebayo would like you and your daughter to attend as his personal guests." Abini stared at the envelope as if it might be poisoned. This was not a request for conversation. It was a move. Outside in worlds like Tunde's, private questions were often answered more easily in public rooms. If he wanted to watch her. If he wanted to see Olamide again. If he wanted others to see them too, then this gala was not kindness. It was investigation. "No," Abini said. Kunle paused. "You have not read it. I do not need to." His voice lowered. "Miss Abini, I am only telling you what I observed today. Mr. Adebayo is not the kind of man who forgets things that disturb him. Neither are the people around him," she thought. "Then tell him to learn." There was silence in the corridor. Then Kunle said something that made her blood run colder. He already asked for old records. Abini did not move. "What records? I was not told. But I know this much: he recognized you." She closed the door without replying. Inside the room, the air felt suddenly too small. Olamide pointed at the envelope on the floor. "Mama!" Abini picked it up with reluctance, opened it, and unfolded the heavy cream card inside. It was elegant, formal, impossible to ignore. "Mr. Tunde Adebayo requests the pleasure of your presence." Below that, in smaller handwriting, was a note written by hand. "Bring the bracelet. We need to speak." Abeni stared at the words until they blurred. "Not please, not if you are willing. We need to speak." The old anger rose first. The audacity of it, the assumption that he still had the right to summon anything from her life. Then fear followed, because if Tunda was already searching records, others would search too. Temilad, whoever stood behind her, anyone who remembered the old arrangement, the old lie, the old disappearance. Mama Olamide asked again. "Are we going?" Abeni looked at her daughter, at the small face that had inherited too much strength too early, at the little wrist still wearing the bracelet that should never have left the room, at the child who deserved safety more than truth yet might soon be dragged into both. No, Abeni whispered at first. Then she looked again at the note. "Bring the bracelet." Not a question, a clue, a challenge. Somewhere beneath the fear, another feeling stirred, one she had spent years suffocating. If Tunda truly did not know, if the lie had not begun with him, if someone else had stolen 5 years from Olamide, 5 years from him, 5 years from all three of them, then running again might no longer protect her daughter. It might only protect the people who had done this. Abeni folded the note carefully. Her voice, when it came, was quiet, but changed. "Yes," she said. "We are going." Olamide's eyes widened. To the rich people's party, Abeni nodded once. "Will there be food?" Despite everything, a broken laugh escaped her. "Yes." Olamide considered that very seriously, then asked, "Do I have to wear shoes the whole time?" Abeni pulled her close and kissed the top of her head. "Yes." Outside, the city roared on. Inside private cars and guarded homes, plans were already being laid. At the top of Lagos, under chandeliers and cameras and expensive perfume, a charity gala would soon become a battlefield. And by the end of it, someone's mask would slip. KT Thorok FHN5. Thai PTC UCTUVTD 1000 to 1200 T Theo Qui DNH. Thought for a second. Chin 6. The gala was held at the Imperial Meridian, a hotel so extravagant it looked less like a building and more like a declaration. Glass walls rose into the Lagos night, reflecting gold headlights and carefully constructed importance. A red carpet stretched from the entrance to the ballroom doors. Men in tuxedos and women in jewel-toned gowns stepped out of luxury cars with the polished ease of people who had never once wondered whether rent would be paid at the end of the month. Abeni noticed all of it, not because she was impressed, because she understood what rooms like this were built to do. They were not just for celebration, they were for sorting people, for reminding everyone silently and beautifully who belonged and who had only been allowed in. She stood at the hotel entrance in a simple deep blue dress borrowed from Mama Sade's niece, one that fit well enough if she kept her shoulders straight and did not breathe too deeply. It was modest, clean, and elegant in the way poverty sometimes becomes elegant when handled carefully. Olamide stood beside her in a white dress with tiny embroidered flowers and stiff shoes she already hated. Her hair had been braided neatly back. Around her wrist still was the wooden bracelet. Abeni had nearly removed it 3 times before leaving. Each time Olamide had looked at her and asked the same question. But why? And Abeni had no answer that a child should carry. So the bracelet stayed. They reached the doors just as a rush of camera flashes exploded near the main entrance. Temilade had arrived. She stepped out of a silver car like she had been sent to the world by luxury itself. Photographers called her name. Socialites leaned in for air kisses. The hotel staff straightened instinctively. She wore black tonight, sleek, and severe diamonds cold at her throat. On another evening, Abeni might have simply looked away. But Temilade's gaze found her almost immediately. No surprise, No hesitation, only recognition sharpened by interest. Then Temelada smiled and turned to the cameras as if she had not seen anything at all. That frightened Abini more than open hostility would have. Inside the ballroom was a kingdom of chandeliers, mirrored pillars, and strategic kindness. Waiters moved like shadows with silver trays. A jazz quartet played softly near the stage. Huge screens displayed the Foundation's slogan about uplifting disadvantaged children, while millionaires sipped imported wine beneath it. Olamide stared openly. "So many lights," she whispered. "So many lies," Abini muttered before she could stop herself. Olamide looked up. What nothing? But it was not nothing. The entire room felt like performance. Every smile had edges. Every greeting carried calculation. Abeni could feel the weight of glances landing on her, then shifting to Olamide, then to the bracelet, then back again. She had spent enough years surviving humiliation to recognize curiosity dressed as politeness. A man in a tuxedo approached with a professional smile. "Kunle." "Miss Abeni," he said. "Mr. Adebayo is expecting you." Of course he was. Abeni followed him through the crowd, one hand firmly around Olamide's. The child moved with alert curiosity, not fear. She noticed everything, the towering flower arrangements, the fountains of glass, the women laughing without warmth, the men speaking with teeth instead of eyes. "Do rich people always smell like this?" she whispered. "Like what?" "Like flowers and fighting." Abeni almost stopped walking. There it was again. That strange, clean instinct in the child, the ability to name what adults preferred to hide. Kunle led them toward a quieter corridor behind the ballroom where the music softened and the air cooled. Tunda was waiting near a private lounge, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a glass he had not touched. When he saw them, something changed in his face. Not shock this time, something steadier, more dangerous. Decision. He dismissed Kunle with a glance. The man withdrew immediately. For a second, no one spoke. Then Olamide, with the unbearable honesty of children, looked up at Tunde and asked, "Why do you keep staring at my hand?" Tunde blinked once, as if the directness had struck him physically. "Because he said carefully, that bracelet used to belong to someone I knew." "It belongs to my mother now," Olamide replied. Abeni stepped in before anything further could unfold. "Say what you called us here to say." Tunde looked at her for a long moment. There were lines on his face that had not existed years ago. Success had sharpened him, but it had also tired him. His eyes were still the same, though. That was the cruel part. Time had changed everything except the thing she had once trusted most. "I asked you here because I need answers," he said. "You lost the right to demand them." His voice lowered. "Then let me ask." Abeni said nothing. He looked at Olamide again. "How old is she?" A chill moved through Abeni from throat to spine. This was the moment she had feared since the schoolyard. He already suspected. Maybe more than suspected. "She is 5, Abeni said. Tunde's jaw tightened. When her pulse hammered once. Hard. "You know when she said." For the first time since they had entered the corridor, he lost some of his control. "No," he said sharply. "I do not." Olamide stepped slightly closer to Abeni, reading tension, if not meaning. Tunde saw the movement and pulled himself back. When he spoke again, his voice was rougher. "I never received a letter. I never knew you were pregnant. I searched for you after you vanished." Abeni laughed once, but there was no humor in it. "Searched, yes. Then whoever you sent did not search very hard. I did not send anyone. I went myself." That hit her harder than she wanted. For a second, the corridor seemed to tilt. He continued, each word measured now, like a man holding a wound shut with his bare hand. "Your house was empty. The neighbors said you had left with another man. Then business collapsed around me. My father fell sick. People I trusted told me you were gone and wanted to stay gone." Abeni stared at him. There was pain in his face, yes, but more than that offense. Genuine offense at old betrayal, not the polished sympathy of a liar, the anger of someone who had also been cut out of the truth. "No," she thought at once. "No, do not be foolish again." Before she could answer, a soft clapping sound came from the end of the corridor. Temilade. She approached with graceful ease, though her eyes had gone bright in that dangerous way. Beautiful people's eyes sometimes do when jealousy is winning. "I was wondering where you disappeared to," she said to Tunde. Then she turned to Abeni with charming cruelty. "And now I see." "This is a private conversation," Tunde said. "Nothing is private at an event with 200 donors and a dozen cameras." Temilade replied. Her gaze slid to Olamide. "You must be the little fighter everyone is talking about." Olamide did not smile. "You are the lady from the school." Temilade laughed softly. "I am? And you were pretending to be nice." A silence followed so complete that even the distant music seemed embarrassed. Abeni nearly closed her eyes. Tunde looked away for the briefest instant, not to avoid the moment, but because if he had looked directly at Temilade, then something colder might have come out of him than he intended. Temilade's smile thinned by half a degree. "Children say such imaginative things," she murmured. "No," Olamide said. "I say true things." There was that stillness again. That unsettling, fearless stillness. Temilade turned to Tunde. "Is this why you invited them to entertain you?" "I invited them because I wanted the truth." About what Tunde held her gaze. "That is my concern." Temilade's face remained composed, but the air around her sharpened. She was not used to being excluded from information where power was involved. She had spent too long positioning herself beside Tunde, too long becoming nearly indispensable. And now a village woman and a child were standing in a private corridor while he spoke to Temilade like an outsider. That was not a small thing. Abeni saw the shift and wanted to leave immediately. Whatever this confrontation was becoming, it would not end cleanly. "We are going," she said. But before she could move, another figure entered the corridor. Madame Ronke. She walked in like she owned silence itself. Older than Temilade, but sharper, her dark gold gown fell perfectly. Her expression was serene. Only her eyes betrayed the speed of her thoughts. The moment she saw Abeni, she stopped. Only for a heartbeat, but long enough. Tunde noticed, and in that instant the entire shape of the night changed. Recognition flared not between lovers, but between hunter and survivor. Madame Ronke recovered first. "Well," she said smoothly, "what an unexpected gathering." Abeni's body had already gone cold. Olamide looked from face to face, confused but alert. Tunde took one slow step forward. "You know her." It was not a question. Madame Ronke smiled. "Should I do not do that?" he said quietly. Temilade looked between them, irritation turning to alarm. "Mother." No one answered her. Abeni could feel years collapsing inward. The memory returned whole, the polished shoes, the cold voice, the threat delivered with such confidence that it had changed the course of an unborn child's life. "Disappear, or your baby will not be safe." Madame Ronke's gaze dropped at last to the bracelet on Olamide's wrist. That was her mistake, because Tunde saw that too. Everything became very still. Then he asked, each word cut with ice. "Why are you looking at that bracelet as if you have seen it before?" Temilade's head turned sharply toward her mother. Madame Ronke did not answer at once. Her poise remained almost perfect, but one thing had shifted the invisible distance between manipulation and exposure. Abeni knew then, with sudden terrible clarity, that hiding would no longer save them. The lie had entered the room. and it was beginning to recognize itself. Before anyone could speak again, a hotel staff member hurried in from the ballroom, pale and breathless. "Mr. Adebayo," he said, "there's an urgent issue downstairs. Security found someone in the service corridor trying to access the medical suite." Tunde frowned. "What medical suite?" "The one prepared for the children's blood donation initiative, sir." "Blood donation, sample collection, medical records." The words hit Abeni and Madame Ronca at exactly the same time. Abeni looked straight at the older woman. Madame Ronca, for the first time all night, looked afraid. And that was when Abeni understood. This gala had never been only about conversation. Somewhere in this building, someone had planned to tamper with evidence before the truth could even be tested. The corridor exploded into motion. Tunde turned to the hotel staff member at once. "Who is in custody?" "A man from the temporary lab team, sir. Security says he was trying to swap sealed sample kits." Temilade's face changed first, not enough for a stranger to notice, but enough for Abeni, who had spent years learning to read danger before it spoke. Madame Ronca changed second, her stillness growing too deliberate to be natural. Tunde saw both. "Take no instructions from anyone except me," he told the staff member. "Lock down the medical suite. No one leaves with samples, records, or equipment. Call my head of security." "Yes, sir." The man rushed away. For one suspended second, the 4 adults and 1 child stood in a silence so sharp it felt engineered. Then Olamide tugged Abeni's hand. "Mama," she whispered, "why does that woman look like the goat that ate cassava and is pretending it did not?" The words were so unexpected that Abeni nearly choked on a laugh. Temilade looked offended. Madame Ronca looked murderous. Tunde, despite the pressure gathering around him, lowered his head briefly. Not quite a smile, more like a crack in restraint. Olamide Abeni said softly, "That is not polite." "It is accurate," the child replied. That almost broke the tension, but only for an instant. The reality returned immediately. Someone had tried to interfere with blood samples. At an event where Tunde had privately summoned Abeni and specifically asked her to bring the bracelet. At an event where a children's medical initiative created the perfect cover for collecting DNA. No one had to say it aloud. The trap had been anticipated, and someone had moved first. Tunde's gaze locked onto Madame Ronca. "You want to tell me why a sample kit would need to be swapped tonight?" Madame Ronca did not blink. "How should I know? Your foundation, your event, your security," Mother Temilade said quietly, and the tremor beneath the word betrayed more than she intended. Madame Ronca did not look at her daughter. Tunde took another step forward. "You recognized Abeni. You recognized the bracelet. And now someone is caught tampering with sealed samples on the one night I ask them both to appear. Tell me why." Madame Ronca's voice remained smooth. "You are jumping toward scandal because of a coincidence and an old face you think you remember. I remember her perfectly." The words landed hard. Not just on Abeni. On Temilade too. A small silence followed, full of the kind of truth that humiliates without raising its voice. Temilade straightened. "Tunde, this is getting absurd. Even if my mother met this woman years ago, what exactly are you suggesting?" Abeni answered before he could. "That your mother came to my house when I was pregnant. She said every word cold and clear and told me to disappear if I wanted my child to live in peace." The corridor seemed to lose air. Temilade's head turned sharply toward Madame Ronca. "What?" The older woman finally looked at Abeni fully. "Careful. Memory is often emotional, and emotional people confuse fear with fact." Abeni had been afraid of this woman once, terrified in truth. Fear had shaped her choices, her hiding, her years of silence. But time had done something else too. It had made her tired. And tired women are dangerous when they stop trembling. "You came alone," Abeni said. "You wore ivory silk and carried a gold purse with a broken clasp. You stood at my doorway as if the whole village offended you." You told me Tunde had chosen a better future. Then you told me that if I stayed, my baby would not be safe." Temilade stared at her mother. Tunde did not move at all. Madame Ronca's expression barely changed, yet something tiny failed inside it. Abeni kept going. "You knew I was pregnant before I told anyone outside my home. You knew where I lived. You knew exactly which fear would work." Olamide looked up at her mother, confused, and suddenly more serious than a 5-year-old child should have to be. "Mama?" Abeni knelt and touched her cheek. "It's all right. It was not all right. But mothers have been lying gently like that for centuries." Footsteps approached fast from the ballroom end of the corridor. Kunle arrived with 2 security men and a sealed evidence pouch in one hand. "Sir," he said to Tunde, "the lab technician is being held downstairs." He had this. Inside the clear pouch were 2 labels already printed. One bore Olamide's full name, the other bore Tunde Adebayo's. Temilade's breath caught. Tunde took the pouch slowly. His face changed in a way Abeni had never seen before. Not anger, not exactly. Something quieter. More lethal. "Who hired him?" he asked. Kunle hesitated. "He says he was paid in cash through an intermediary, by whom he has not said yet." Tunde looked at Madame Ronca. Then Temilade. He did not accuse either woman directly. He did not need to. The silence he gave them was worse than shouting. Temilade shook her head at once. "I had nothing to do with this." Madame Ronca spoke over her. "A planted story proves nothing." Kunle, who was far too careful to speak recklessly, chose that moment to add, "The technician also had a photo on his phone, sir." Tunde held out his hand. Kunle unlocked the device and passed it over. Abeni watched Tunde read something on the screen, watched his eyes harden by degrees. Then he turned the phone around and held it where everyone could see. It was a cropped photo of Olamide at the school playground, zoomed tightly on the bracelet. Below it a message, "Confirm if child still has bracelet. Proceed only if man notices. No signature, no name." "But enough." Temilade went pale. "Mother," she whispered. Madame Ronca's reply came instantly too fast. Anyone could fabricate that. Tunde's voice dropped into something terrifyingly calm. "And yet you are the only person in this corridor who looks at that message as if you already know what it means." He handed the phone back to Kunle. Then, without warning, he turned to Olamide and crouched in front of her. The shift was so abrupt, it unsettled everyone. "Olamide," he said gently, "I need you to answer one question. Did anyone besides your mother ever talk to you about this bracelet?" The child thought. "Yes." Abeni's head snapped toward her. Olamide blinked at both adults, then answered with the serious patience children use when they cannot understand why grown people are suddenly slower than they are. The old woman near the cake table. Every adult in the corridor froze. What old woman? Tunde asked. She had shiny shoes and very strong perfume. She bent down and asked if the bracelet was from my father. I said, maybe. Then Mama called me, so I left. Abeni felt ice in her stomach. Temilade looked at Madame Ronca again, and this time accusation was no longer hidden. "You spoke to her." Madame Ronca's tone sharpened. "I speak to many children at charity events. It means nothing, but the timing meant everything." Tunde stood. "Enough," he said. The word was quiet. "Absolute. We are not doing this in a hotel corridor." He looked to Kunle. "Bring the technician the labels and the phone to the private conference suite. Call the independent forensic consultant I use for internal fraud cases. And call my legal counsel." Temilade stiffened. "Legal counsel?" "Yes. This is a family misunderstanding, not a criminal matter." That was the wrong sentence. Tunde turned slowly toward her. A child was targeted. Medical evidence was nearly tampered with. If you think I am still deciding whether this is criminal, then you do not know me at all. The blow landed visibly. Not loud, not dramatic, but visible. Temilade's eyes flashed with pain first, then fury. Madame Ronca stepped in immediately, maternal instinct finally aligning with self-preservation. You are emotional Tunda. Old memories are clouding your judgment. No, he said. For the first time in years, I suspect my judgment was clouded before tonight. Abini felt those words like a door opening somewhere she had long ago bricked shut. Could it really be true? Could he truly have been blind all these years, not complicit? That hope was dangerous. Hope always was. And yet it lived. She hated that. Tunda looked at Abini now, fully the corridor, and all its watching eyes falling away for a moment. I am asking you to come with me, he said. Not as a guest, not as a favor. As the mother of a child whose safety may already have been threatened because of me. Abini searched his face. Years ago she had believed him once and paid for it with exile, fear, and 5 years of loneliness. But tonight, someone had moved to alter evidence before a test had even been performed. That meant the truth mattered to powerful people, which meant hiding would no longer be enough. She looked down at Olamide. The child looked back with startling steadiness. We should go, she said. Why, Abini asked softly. Because the bad people are scared. For 1 second, nobody in the corridor said a word. Then Tunda gave the smallest nod, as if acknowledging not only the child's courage, but her accuracy. Yes, he said, they are. So Abini stood, straightened her shoulders, and made the decision Lear had delayed for years. All right, she said, we go now. But no more half-truths. Not from them, not from you. Tunda held her gaze. Agreed. As they began moving toward the private conference wing, Temilade remained frozen in the corridor, torn between loyalty and horror. Madame Ronca, for the first time since Abeni had seen her again, had lost the serene certainty that once made her seem untouchable. Masks do not crack all at once. First, they slip. And tonight, under hotel lights and donor speeches and polished lies, the first slip had become impossible to hide. By the time the conference room doors closed, one fact had already changed the balance of power. This was no longer a question of whether Olamide's identity mattered. It was a question of how many people had built their lives around making sure it never came to light. The private conference suite on the 20th floor did not look like a place where lives were dismantled. It looked like power pretending to be elegant. A long, polished table ran through the center of the room beneath soft, recessed lighting. Floor-to-ceiling windows opened over Lagos, where the city shimmered in heat and distance too far away to hear the sirens' arguments, hunger and bargaining that kept it alive. A tray of untouched water glasses sat at one end of the table. A screen glowed on the wall. Leather chairs waited in perfect order, as if truth itself could be invited to sit down and behave. It did not. By the time everyone entered the room, already carried too much history. Tunda walked in first, not hurried, not loud, but with the kind of control that made everyone else instinctively adjust their breathing. Abeni followed with Olamide beside her, still holding the child's hand. Kunle came next, carrying the sealed evidence pouch, the technician's phone, and a thin folder that had already begun to gather the weight of the night. 2 security men escorted the lab technician inside. He was sweating through his collar now, his earlier confidence gone. Temilade entered without being invited to leave. Madame Ronca entered because women like her did not exit a battlefield simply because danger had become visible. Then came the others. Tunde's legal counsel, a silver-haired woman named Ifeoma, arrived with a tablet, and a look that suggested she had stopped being shocked by human greed many years ago. Behind her came an independent forensic consultant, Tunde trusted for internal fraud investigations, a compact, sharp-eyed man named Dr. Bako. Last of all, after a hurried summons, came one of the senior board members of Adebayo Holdings, Chief Adewale, older, soft-spoken, influential, and until that night, largely considered one of the most stabilizing voices in the company. That last detail would not survive the hour. Olamide looked around the room once and whispered to Abini, "This place smells like expensive fear." Abini almost told her to be quiet. Almost. Instead, she squeezed her hand gently. Tunda took his seat at the head of the table, but did not lean back. He placed both palms on the polished wood and looked first at the technician. "Say your full name." The man swallowed. "Moses Econom. You were caught attempting to swap labeled sample kits intended for a children's health initiative." "I didn't swap anything," Moses said too quickly. "I was only checking inventory." Dr. Bacco opened the sealed evidence pouch, lifted the duplicate labels with gloved fingers, and placed them on the table. "Inventory doesn't usually require pre-printed names for sealed private samples," he said mildly. Moses said nothing. Tunda's voice stayed quiet. "You were found with these labels. A message on your phone references the child's bracelet and directs you to proceed only if I noticed it. So I will ask once very clearly. Who paid you?" Moses looked down. "I want a lawyer," Ifeoma answered before Tunda did. "You may want one. That is reasonable, but right now your choices are simple. Cooperate and make a fraud case easier on yourself, or stay silent and let the evidence grow heavier around you." His eyes darted too briefly toward Madame Ronca. That was enough. Temilade saw it. Abeni saw Temilade see it. And Tunda saw everything. Madame Ronca, however, remained impressively composed. "This is turning into theatre," she said. A frightened employee glances at a woman in the room, and suddenly guilt is assigned by appetite. Chief Adewale, who had been silent until then, cleared his throat. Perhaps he said carefully, "We should avoid conclusions until we understand whether there was an actual breach." Tunda turned his head very slowly toward him. "An actual breach," he repeated. The older man folded his hands. "I mean only that a mislabeled sample is one thing. A coordinated conspiracy involving medical fraud is another. We should distinguish incompetence from criminality." Abini felt something tighten in the room, not because of what Chief Adewale said, because of how fast he said it. Dr. Bacco tapped the technician's phone. "The message is not incompetence," he said, "nor are duplicate labels prepared in advance, nor is unauthorized access to a restricted collection area." Temilade finally spoke, voice tight with controlled strain. "Mother, if you know anything, say it now." Madame Ronca turned to her daughter, and for the first time that evening, something almost like irritation cracked through the older woman's polish. "I know that panicked women accuse easily," she said, "and that men confronted with old regret become sentimental and reckless. That was aimed at Abeni and Tunda both. It might have worked on weaker people. It did not work now." Abeni lifted her chin. "You threatened me when I was pregnant?" Madame Ronca's eyes cooled. "You keep saying that." "Because it happened. And yet you have no proof." Before Abeni could answer, Olamide spoke. "She is lying again." Every adult in the room paused. Tunde looked at the child. "Why do you say that?" Olamide frowned as if the answer were obvious. "Because when people tell the truth, their faces match their voices. Her face keeps hiding." The room went completely still. Children sometimes say things adults dismiss because the language is too simple to sound authoritative. But simplicity often reaches places sophistication cannot. Temilade looked away first. That mattered too. Tunde stood. "Dr. Bacco, I want 2 things done immediately. First, a clean collection process with independent chain of custody documentation for any samples taken tonight. Second, I want the technician's phone cloned and analyzed, including deleted messages." Dr. Bacco nodded. Ifeoma added, And no one in this room leaves until we have preliminary statements. Chief Adewale shifted. Is that necessary? Now it was Ifeoma who studied him. Very. Kunle stepped forward. Sir, there's something else. He opened the thin folder and removed a printed call log summary. The technician's burner phone made 2 calls this afternoon, one to an unregistered number, the other to a line routed through a private office exchange in the Adebayo Holdings executive wing. That changed everything. Chief Adewale's hands stilled. Temilade stared. Tunde did not even blink. Which office? Kunle answered with professional care. The line is registered through a discretionary routing block used by 3 senior officers. Yours, Chief Adewale's, and the Executive Strategy Office, temporarily assigned to Madame Ronke during Foundation coordination. No one moved. It was too neat. Too ugly. And suddenly the conspiracy looked larger than jealousy. Chief Adewale leaned back. Coincidence. Of course, Ifeoma said flatly. The old man bristled. I have served this company longer than almost anyone here. Yes, Tunde said, which is why I am interested in why your first instinct tonight was to reduce evidence tampering to incompetence. Chief Adewale's face hardened by degrees. Because I understand how scandal destroys shareholder confidence. There it was. Not innocence, priority. Abini felt a chill. Some people did not need to commit the first act of cruelty to become part of its machinery. They only needed to value reputation above truth. Tunde turned to the screen on the wall. Kunle. A moment later the screen lit with security footage from the gala corridor and service areas. Timestamps rolled, angles shifted, staff moved in and out. Then one clip froze everyone's breathing. The technician Moses stood near the service elevator at 8:14 p.m. A man approached him briefly, face partially turned away from the camera. Not enough to hide completely. Chief Adewale. The board member's color changed. That proves nothing, he said instantly. I speak to dozens of people at events. Maybe Tunde said. Kunle advanced the footage. This time there was no audio, but the body language said enough. Chief Adewale handing something small to Moses. Moses slipping it into his inside pocket. A quick glance around. Separation. Cash, or a key card, or instructions. Either way, not innocence. Temilade whispered almost to herself. Mother, what did you do? Madame Ronke did not answer. Chief Adewale did. What was necessary, he said. The words dropped into the room like poison. Abini turned sharply toward him. The old man no longer looked interested in caution. He looked irritated that concealment had failed. Tunde, he said almost wearily, you are emotional because of the child. Understandable. But companies are not built on emotion. 5 years ago you were unstable after that village nonsense. Distracted, vulnerable. We had investors watching your father failing acquisition talks collapsing. You needed direction. Abeni went cold. Village nonsense. There it was. The language underneath everything. Tunde's face had gone completely still now, which was far worse than anger. Chief Adewale continued mistaking silence for opportunity. Madame Ronke and I agreed on very little in those years, but on one issue we agreed completely. Your future could not be tied to scandal from nowhere. From nowhere, Abeni said. He looked at her as if she were unfortunate, but not important. You were a complication. No, Tunde said quietly. She was a person. Chief Adewale exhaled as though speaking to a child who refused practical wisdom. And now the child is another complication. If she is yours, then the matter becomes delicate. If she is not, then tonight becomes a humiliation. Either outcome damages the company unless controlled. Olamide pressed closer to Abini. The child did not fully understand corporate language, but she understood contempt. Tunde took one step toward Chief Adewale. Say her name. The old man blinked. What? Say her name. Tunde repeated. If you intend to discuss my daughter as a complication, then at least use her name. Silence. That one word daughter hit the room with extraordinary force. Temilade closed her eyes. Abeni felt her breath catch. Chief Adewale recovered first. You do not know that yet. No, Tunde said. But you do. Or you would not have acted before any official test was taken. Now all eyes turned to Madame Ronca. She still had not cracked fully, but the edges were showing now. Temilade stood abruptly. Tell me the truth. Her mother remained seated. Tell me now. Finally Madame Ronca spoke, but the voice that emerged had lost some of its silk. The truth is that power does not wait for innocence. It protects itself. Temilade stared at her disbelief turning into revulsion. You knew, Madame Ronca lifted her chin. I knew that a poor girl carrying a rich man's child would destroy the order that was being built. Abeni's hand tightened around the back of Olamide's chair so hard it hurt. Tunde's voice dropped into something almost unrecognizable. And so you destroyed us instead. No one answered, because that was the truth. Not yet the whole truth, but enough to expose the structure Madame Ronca Chief Adewale and whoever else had chosen power over honesty. Temilade's silence over the years, the tampering, the lies, the assumption that poor people could be erased if the rich stayed coordinated long enough. Ifeoma stood and closed her tablet. That is sufficient for immediate legal preservation, she said. Security will hold Mr. Ekanem for the police. I recommend formal corporate suspension procedures for Chief Adewale pending investigation. And I strongly recommend that any paternity test involving the child be conducted tonight under external supervision. Dr. Beko nodded once. I can arrange it in the adjoining suite. Tunde turned to Abeni then. Not as a CEO, not as a man making demands, as someone standing at the edge of a truth that might either heal him or break him open completely. I will not force this, he said. You decide. Abeni looked at Olamide. The child looked back, brave and tired, and still too small for the size of the room. Then Olamide asked softly, If we do, this will the bad people stop hiding? No one in the room could answer that honestly. So Abeni did the only thing left. She nodded. Yes, she said. We do it. And with that, the final door between suspicion and proof began to open. The adjoining suite had been prepared for donors and high-profile guests who wanted privacy during the Foundation's blood screening drive. Now it felt like a witness room. The bright softness of the hotel lighting no longer looked elegant. It looked clinical. A portable medical station had been arranged against one wall, sealed kits labeled tubes, sterile gloves, a compact centrifuge, a digital chain of custody tablet. Dr. Beko moved through the space with brisk precision, checking seals, verifying kit numbers, documenting every step allowed so there could be no argument later. No substitutions, he said. No unsealed handling. Every signature logged. Every transfer witnessed. Ifeoma stood nearby, arms folded, watching with the stillness of a lawyer who knew how quickly truth could be buried if procedure slipped for even 1 second. Tunde stood at the far end of the room, not interfering, not pacing, but carrying a tension so concentrated it seemed to change the temperature around him. He had faced hostile takeovers, regulatory threats, sabotage, and the slow cruelty of old money trying to remind him where it thought he belonged. Yet nothing in his life had prepared him for standing 10 feet away from a 5-year-old child who might be his daughter. Might. The word was unbearable. Abeni sat beside Olamide on a pale grey sofa, helping the child drink juice from a straw. Olamide's shoes had finally come off. They lay beneath the table like defeated little enemies. The child's feet curled into the edge of the cushion while she watched the adults with tired but unsettling attentiveness. "Mama," she whispered, not quietly enough if this is just blood. "Why does everyone look like someone died?" No one answered immediately. Then Tunda did, because sometimes he said voice low truth scares people more than pain. Olamide considered that with total seriousness, then nodded as if filing it away beside all the other strange adult lessons of the week. Dr. Bacco approached gently. "Olamide, I need a very small sample from your arm. It will hurt only for a moment." The child eyed the needle tray. "Smaller than a mosquito?" He almost smiled. "A little bigger. That is rude." Even if Ioma's mouth twitched, Abini brushed a hand over her daughter's hair. "You can do this." Olamide glanced at Tunda. "Will he do it too?" Tunde stepped forward at once. "Yes." The answer came too quickly, too personally. Everyone heard it. And for one brief second, Abini allowed herself to see not the powerful CEO, but the younger man she had once loved, the one who would have stepped into any pain first if he thought it would make things easier for her. That memory hurt. It also softened something she had kept hardened too long. The samples were taken under full observation. Olamide did not cry, though she glared at the needle afterward, as if considering whether it deserved consequences. Tunda bared his arm without a word. When the phlebotomist pressed cotton to the crook of his elbow, he barely seemed to feel it. But Abeni saw his hand. It trembled once. Only once? Enough. The samples were sealed immediately. Logged, scanned, handed from one gloved hand to another. No one left the room. No one took a phone call without Ifeoma hearing it. Outside, hotel security had already separated the technician, while local law enforcement, discreetly summoned, was on its way to take statements from Chief Adewale and others. Temilade had not entered the suite. That in itself said a great deal. Madame Ronca had demanded to leave and been told she could wait downstairs with counsel. For the first time in years, perhaps decades, women like her were being asked to wait instead of command. It suited her badly. The processing time felt endless. Olamide fell asleep first. Her head ended up in Abeni's lap, one small arm hanging over the edge of the sofa, the wooden bracelet still circling her wrist like a stubborn piece of fate. Abeni sat very still, one hand resting on the child's back. Across the room, Tunda stood at the window looking out over Lagos, though it was obvious he saw nothing of the city below. Time stretched. No one wasted words. At last, Dr. Bacco emerged from the inner lab area with a printed report and a face that had gone professionally neutral in the way experts do when they understand the emotional weight of what they are carrying. Every person in the room stood, even Abeni, though she had to move carefully so as not to wake Olamide. Dr. Bacco looked first to Ifeoma, then to Tunde, then to Abeni. "The analysis is conclusive," he said. "There is a biological parent-child match. The world did not explode. It narrowed." Tunda's breath left him like he had been struck. Abeni closed her eyes for one brief second, not because she had doubted the truth, but because hearing it confirmed aloud made all 5 years rise inside her at once, the fear, the exile, the hunger, the small room, the lies, the child's questions, the nights she had stood over Olamide's bed, promising silently that one day none of this suffering would have been for nothing. When she opened her eyes again, Tunda was no longer looking at Dr. Bacco. He was looking at Olamide, his daughter. There are moments when joy and grief arrive together so violently they become indistinguishable. This was one of them. He crossed the room slowly, as if sudden movement might shatter the fragile fact now standing between them. Olamide stirred just then, blinked awake, and frowned at the room as if annoyed that adults were still behaving strangely. "Why are you all breathing like that?" she murmured. No one laughed this time. Tunda crouched in front of her. His face had changed. Not softened exactly. Something deeper than softness. Something unguarded. "Olamide," he said. And there was no mistaking what lived in his voice now. There is something I should have known a long time ago. The child rubbed one eye. Watabeni held her breath. Tunda's gaze flicked up to her for half a second, asking permission without words. She gave the smallest nod. He turned back to Olamide. I'm your father. The child stared at him. Children do not always react to life-changing truths the way adults imagine they should. There was no immediate dramatic recognition, no cinematic leap into his arms. Olamide simply looked at him with the deep, measuring seriousness that made so many grown people uneasy. Then she asked, "For real?" A broken sound escaped Tunda, something between a laugh and a sob. "Yes," he said. "For real." Olamide looked at Abeni. "You knew." Abeni's throat tightened. "Yes. Why didn't you tell me? Because I was afraid. Because I thought he abandoned us. Because powerful people threatened you before you even took your first breath. Because sometimes mothers choose silence when every option feels dangerous. But what she said was, because I was trying to protect you." Olamide absorbed that quietly. Then she looked back at Tunda. "You took too long. No accusation from a boardroom, courtroom, or press conference could have cut as cleanly as that." Tunda bowed his head. "I know," he said. "I know." The child's face, still sleepy and solemn, did not soften yet. "Mama cried a lot." Abeni closed her eyes. Tunda did not. He let the words hit him fully. "I know that too," he whispered, though of course he could not truly know all of it. Not yet. But the shame in his face said he understood enough. Then came the question that silenced the entire suite. "If you were my father," Olamide asked, voice small and honest and devastating, "why did Mama have to cry for so long?" No one moved. Not Dr. Bacco, not Ifeoma, not the hotel staff waiting discreetly by the door. Not even the city beyond the glass seemed to move. This was the moral center of the whole story, laid bare by a 5-year-old child who did not know the phrase moral center and did not need to. Tunda dropped to both knees in front of her, not because anyone asked him to, because standing suddenly felt dishonest. "I was lied to," he said, each word rawer than the last, "and I failed to find the truth in time. I failed your mother, and I failed you. I cannot change those lost years, Olamide, but I will spend the rest of my life making sure no one ever steals anything from you again. There are promises adults make to children because the moment demands sound, and there are promises adults make when something inside them has shifted permanently." This was the second kind. Olamide studied him with the solemnity of a tiny judge. Then, with sleepy practicality, she reached out one hand and touched his cheek. It was not forgiveness. Not yet. But it was contact. Permission to remain. Across the room, Ifeoma lowered her gaze respectfully. Dr. Bacco quietly placed the report into a sealed legal envelope. Even they understood the holiness of certain silences. Then the silence broke. Kunle entered after a discreet knock, his expression tight with urgency. "Sir," he said to Tunda, "the police have taken Moses. He has started talking." Tunda rose slowly, though his eyes stayed on Olamide. "What did he say?" Kunle glanced briefly at Abeni, then answered carefully. "He confirms payment came through Chief Adewale's office. He also says Madame Ronke gave the original instructions years ago to intercept letters, falsify a report, and ensure Miss Abeni disappeared before any pregnancy could affect your engagement prospects or the board transition." Abeni went cold again. Even after everything hearing it stated so plainly made it feel newly violent. Tunda's face emptied of all warmth. "And Temilada?" he asked. Kunle hesitated. "Moses says she knew pieces of it. Not the beginning, perhaps, but enough. She knew the child might be yours before tonight." Abeni shut her eyes. Of course. That explained the smile, the invitations, the interest, the performance of kindness, not ignorance, calculation. Tunde stood absolutely still. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, in a way that made everyone straighten instinctively. "Prepare a public statement for the board and press," he said. "No evasions, no temporary language. Chief Adewale is suspended immediately pending criminal investigation. Madam Ronke is barred from all company and foundation activity. Temilade." He stopped, then finished with surgical clarity. "Temilade is no longer associated with me personally or professionally." Kunle nodded at once. The decisions were swift, clean, and merciless. Justice does not always look loud. Sometimes it looks like the powerful finally refusing to protect the powerful. Olamide, who had caught only fragments, looked up and asked, "Does that mean the bad people are in trouble now?" Tunde looked back at her. "Yes," he said, "it does." She nodded once, satisfied. Then, because she was 5, and the soul cannot hold unbearable truths at full intensity forever, she asked the most childlike thing in the room. "Can I have cake now?" This time the laughter came. Small, wet-eyed, disbelieving. Human. And in that strange, aching laugh, the first real thread of healing entered the room. But the night was not finished yet, because outside this private suite waited cameras, board members, rumors, and a world that had once mocked a little rural girl for not knowing her place. Now that world was about to learn exactly who she was. By the time they came down from the private suite, the gala had changed its skin. The music still played, glasses still clinked, waiters still moved with polished efficiency beneath chandeliers and donor banners. But the illusion of ease was gone. It lived now only on the surface, thin as lacquer over rotting wood. Whispers moved faster than servers. Phones glowed beneath tables. Eyes tracked every doorway. And when Tunde Adebayo stepped back into the ballroom with a beanie on one side and Olamide on the other, the entire room felt it. Not because he raised his voice, because he did not. Power rarely needs to shout when it has finally chosen a side. Olamide had insisted on walking by herself. Her shoes were back on, though she clearly resented them, and the wooden bracelet remained on her wrist like a small, stubborn crown. Abeni walked half a step behind at first, out of instinct more than intention, but Tunde slowed almost imperceptibly until the three of them moved in one line. That mattered. People noticed. They noticed the distance he did not place between himself and the poor woman in the borrowed dress. They noticed the way his gaze checked Olamide before anything else. They noticed that Abeni, though exhausted, no longer looked like a woman bracing to be thrown out. She looked like someone who had survived the storm long enough to stop apologizing for still being standing. At the front of the ballroom, Chief Adewale was already gone, escorted discreetly out through a private exit after police questioning. Madam Ronke's seat sat empty. Temilade remained near the edge of the room, no longer glowing, no longer in control of how she was seen. Her makeup was still flawless, her posture still perfect. But dignity built on falsehood always collapses strangely. It does not break first in the body, it breaks in the eyes. She watched Tunde approach the stage, and understood before anyone else did that whatever she had hoped to preserve was over. A foundation representative stepped nervously toward the microphone. Tunde took it from him without ceremony. The room fell silent. Even the quartet in the corner lowered their instruments. For one heartbeat, Lagos glittered behind the ballroom glass, indifferent to wealth, scandal, grief, and revelation. Then Tunde spoke. "Thank you all for being here tonight." His voice traveled easily, deep and steady, carrying not performance, but finality. It was the voice of a man used to commanding markets, boards, negotiations. Yet tonight, there was something else in it too, something stripped cleaner by shame. This event was intended to honor children, he said, to support their health, education, and dignity. Instead, tonight has revealed how easily adults speak of those values while betraying them in practice. A current moved through the crowd, small, tense, electric. Tunda continued. There has been a serious internal breach involving evidence, tampering, abuse of institutional trust, and actions that affected not only this foundation, but lives outside it, deeply and irreparably. Now no one was pretending to sip wine. No one was smiling. No one was breathing casually. Tunda's hand tightened once around the microphone, then loosened. Some years ago, lies were told in my name. Decisions were made about another human life without my knowledge and without my consent. Those lies harmed a woman who should never have suffered them. They also deprived a child of truth, safety, and recognition. Abeni stood very still. She had imagined many things over the years. Imagined confronting him in private. Imagined refusing him forever. Imagined him doubting her, dismissing her, apologizing too late, or failing to apologize at all. She had never imagined this. A powerful man in a room full of powerful people, publicly naming harm without hiding behind legal softness. No woman like her expected that from the world. Perhaps that was why it hit so hard. Tunda turned then, not dramatically but openly, toward Olamide. This child, he said, was mocked today for where she came from, laughed at for her clothes, treated as though dignity belongs more naturally to the rich than to the poor. Several people in this room lowered their eyes. Good, Abeni thought. Good. Tunde's voice sharpened. She defended herself, and for that she was judged more harshly than those who provoked her. Many of you saw part of that incident. What you did not see is the deeper truth behind it. He paused. When he spoke again, the words landed like judgment and blessing at once. Olamide is my daughter. No gasp could be contained after that. The ballroom burst into stunned murmurs, broken breaths, whispered names, half-finished denials, rapid calculations. Some people turned fully toward the child. Some toward Abeni. Some toward Temilade, as if scandal required a woman to wear it before people believed it had become real. Olamide frowned up at the noise. Why are they acting like goats again? She whispered. Abeni had to press her lips together to stop a laugh. Tunda went on. The woman standing beside her is Abeni. She is Olamide's mother, and she was wronged intentionally, strategically and cruelly by people who believed power gave them the right to decide whose life mattered and whose could be erased. His gaze moved through the room, not searching for approval. Measuring complicity. Those responsible are already under investigation. Effective immediately, there will be suspensions, formal legal referrals, and a complete, independent review of all relevant corporate and foundation records. There will be no quiet settlement, no hidden arrangement, no protection for status. That sentence cut through the room like a blade, because everyone there understood what it meant. He was not going to preserve the circle. He was breaking it. At the edge of the crowd, Temilade's face finally shifted, not with theatrical grief, with something uglier and more naked. Loss. Not just of Tunda, of position, narrative, future, the polished life she had built around inevitability. She stepped forward before she could stop herself. Tunda, the single word cracked in the air. Everyone heard it. He turned his head just enough to acknowledge her existence, but not enough to soften what came next. No. The word was quiet. Absolute. Temilade stopped where she was, her lips parted, closed, opened again. I did not know everything. A weak defense. True, perhaps, in the most technical sense. Morally useless. Tunda faced her fully now, but his expression held no cruelty. Only the exhaustion that follows final clarity. You knew enough, he said. The room felt colder. Temilade's eyes flicked toward Abeni, Then Olamide. Shame and resentment fought visibly across her face. Shame lost. This woman came back to destroy everything she said. Abini did not flinch. No, she replied, voice calm and carrying farther than she intended. I came to raise my child. Your lies simply ran out of room. That landed. A different kind of silence followed the kind crowds give when truth is elegant enough to become unforgettable. Temilade had no answer. For years, women like Abeni were expected to speak only from pain. Trembling, pleading, explaining. But truth delivered without begging terrifies dishonest people more than any scream. Temilade turned as if to leave. Then Olamide spoke. Wait. Every head turned to the child. She looked at Temilade with the grave curiosity only small children can carry so naturally. Why did you want my mama to stay sad? No one could save Temilade from that question. Not fashion, not breeding, not careful language, not even her own intelligence. She stared at Olamide. For one long second, then looked away first. That was answer enough. Security approached discreetly, not to drag her out, only to make it clear that the room no longer belonged to her. She lifted her chin, gathered what remained of her composure, and walked out alone. No one followed. The rich are rarely abandoned in public. Tonight she was. Once she was gone, the room seemed to exhale. Tunda handed the microphone back to the Foundation representative. The man looked like someone who had accidentally swallowed a storm. Then Tunda did something no one in that ballroom expected. He stepped off the stage. He walked directly to Abeni. And in front of donors, board associates, journalists, society, wives, sponsors, and men who had once believed money could bury anything, he stopped before the woman they had considered disposable. Not to display ownership, not to perform romance, to honor damage. I cannot return what was stolen from you, he said quietly, but in the silence every nearby person still heard it. I cannot undo your fear, or the years you carried alone. But if you allow it, I will spend the rest of my life earning the chance to stand beside you honestly. Abini's throat tightened. She saw that younger version of him then. Not fully restored life, never does that, but visible through the man he had become. The boy with ambition in his eyes and wood shavings on his fingers carving a bracelet, as if love itself were enough to protect a future. It had not been enough. But truth, responsibility, and time might still become something. Not instantly, not magically, not because a ballroom was watching. Abini understood now that healing is not the same as forgetting. It is not even the same as forgiving. Healing begins much smaller, with whether one person tells the truth and another chooses not to run from it. So she gave him the most honest answer she had. Do not promise me forever tonight, she said. Promise me tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that. Tunda held her gaze. I do. Olamide looked between them and sighed with exaggerated seriousness. That is many days. A laugh broke through the tension around them, real this time, soft and surprised and human. The gala ended early. The press did, of course, erupt. By morning, headlines would spread across Lagos: scandal, daughter betrayal, corporate conspiracy. Hidden child foundation fraud. Commentators would rage. Social media would devour every detail. There would be arrests, interviews, legal filings, shareholder panic, public opinion, battles. But those were the fires of the world. This story ended somewhere quieter. 3 months later, in a sunlit community hall, attached to a children's cultural center, funded under new leadership rows of parents, sat beneath bright cloth banners while children lined up barefoot on soft mats. A small hand drum sounded, then another, and Olamide stepped onto the floor. She wore a simple white training uniform with green stitching at the cuffs. Her braids were tied back. Her chin was lifted. The wooden bracelet was gone now, not discarded, but preserved safely at home. In its place was a red cord Baba Femi had once braided for discipline and courage. She moved through her form with beautiful concentration. Step turn, strike, breathe. No panic, no apology, no shrinking. The audience clapped at the end, but Abeni did not clap immediately. She just watched. At the beginning of this story, people had stared at her daughter because they thought she did not belong. Now they watched because she was impossible not to admire. Beside Abeni Tunde stood quietly, not taking the moment over not acting, as though presence alone erased absence. He had kept his promise in small ways. School pickups, honest conversations, legal protection, time, listening, showing up when it was ordinary, not only when it was dramatic. It was not enough to erase the past. It was enough to begin. Olamide spotted them in the crowd and waved wildly, discipline forgotten. Abeni laughed out loud. Tunda laughed too. Then the child ran toward them at full speed and crashed into both of them at once. For a brief second, all three held on, not perfectly healed, not untouched, but together. And in that embrace lived the real ending, not the fall of the guilty, though that mattered, not the restoration of status, though that came, but the quiet, hard-earned return of what should never have been stolen in the first place, a child's right to belong. What this story reminds us is that the deepest wounds are not always caused by poverty, distance, or hardship, but by lies, pride, and the cruelty of people who believe power gives them the right to decide another person's worth. Abeni did not survive because life was fair to her. She survived because love made her endure what should have broken her. She carried shame that was never hers, fear she did not deserve, and a loneliness no mother should ever have to bear. And yet she still raised Olamide with strength, dignity, and a heart that refused to become cruel. That is the quiet heroism the world often overlooks. Olamide's story also teaches us that truth may be delayed, but it does not die. It waits. It breathes beneath injustice. And one day, when the time is right, it rises. The people who mocked, manipulated, and oppressed others believed money and influence could bury the past forever. But in the end, truth exposed them. Justice reached them, and love returned in a form they could no longer control. Most of all, this story teaches that healing does not begin with revenge. It begins when someone finally tells the truth, accepts responsibility, and chooses to stay long enough to rebuild what was destroyed. If this story touched your heart, tell me in the comments which moment affected you the most, and what would you have done in Abeni's place. And if you love powerful emotional stories about justice, healing, and unforgettable family bonds, subscribe to the channel and stay with us for more.